The first thing my father did when I came home was laugh. Not loud. That would have been easier. It was smaller than that. Sharper. A single breath through his nose as he stood in the kitchen doorway with one hand still wrapped around a coffee mug, stained brown around the rim. The sound barely existed, but it slid under my skin anyway. It carried recognition, judgment, amusement. Like he had expected this. Like the sight of me standing there with one duffel bag hanging from my shoulder and rainwater dripping from my jacket confirmed something ugly he had believed about me for years. Behind him, the kitchen light buzzed softly. I remember that sound more clearly than his face. That weak electrical hum above the stove. The refrigerator clicking on. The faint smell of burned toast buried underneath old grease and damp wood. I remember the rain most of all. Cold water sliding from my hairline down the side of my neck while I stood in the doorway and tried not to look exhausted. Tried not to look like someone returning. Tried not to look like someone who had failed. You look thin, he said. Not hello. Not how long are you staying. Just that. You look thin. I tightened my grip around the strap of the bag. My fingers hurt from the train ride. I'd slept sitting upright with my forehead against the vibrating window while a kid somewhere behind me coughed for almost 3 straight hours. My body still felt like it was moving. My stomach was hollow enough to ache. I'm fine, I said. He nodded slowly. That little nod people give when they don't believe you but want you to continue embarrassing yourself. My mother appeared behind him a second later, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The moment her eyes landed on me, something flickered across her face so quickly I almost missed it. Not happiness, not concern, panic, tiny, instant, then Barry. Oh, she said quietly. Just that, though. Like she'd opened a cabinet and found something she forgot was rotting inside. For 1 second, nobody moved. Rain hammered against the porch roof hard enough to vibrate through the wall. I could hear the clock in the dining room ticking. My father took another sip from his mug and leaned one shoulder against the doorway. You finally run out of people to blame, he asked. There it was. Not even 1 full minute. I felt something tighten beneath my rib. Not anger yet. Something older. Something exhausted. The kind of pain that had lost the energy to become emotion. I just need a place for a few days, I said. My mother glanced at him immediately before answering. That was the first thing I noticed. Not what she said. Where she looked. Always him first. Always checking the emotional temperature of the room through his face before allowing herself one of her own. A few days, she repeated carefully. The floorboards creaked upstairs. My younger brother Ryan was awake. I knew his footsteps before I saw him because he walked heel heavy like he wanted the entire house to feel him moving through it. Even as a kid, he had moved that way. Aggressively. Confidently. Like every hallway belonged to him. He appeared at the top of the staircase wearing sweatpants and no shirt, rubbing sleep from one eye. Then he saw me. Then he smiled. And that smile, Jesus Christ. There are smiles that welcome you. There are smiles that mock you. And then there are smiles that remember exactly who you used to be. Ryan leaned against the railing. Well, holy shit, he said softly. Look who's back. I looked away first. Not because I was weak. Because I already knew what he saw, the bag. The wet clothes, the exhaustion, the proof. I had left this house 3 years ago, swearing I would never come back. I had stood in this exact doorway with my hands shaking and told them all I'd rather die than spend another second inside this place. Ryan laughed then too. He'd followed me onto the porch while I loaded my car and told me I'd be back within a year. You don't survive without us, he had said. At the time I thought he was angry. Now I understood something worse. He had been certain. That certainty sat inside his face now while he descended the stairs slowly, one hand sliding along the railing. You lose the apartment, he asked. No, the job, I didn't answer. That was enough. His eyebrows lifted. There it is, my father chuckled into his coffee. Not loud. Still small. Still controlled. Somehow worse. I could feel heat climbing my neck now. My wet shirt clung to my back. The house felt too warm after the rain outside, but not comfortable warm. Thick warm. Suffocating warm. Kind that made breathing feel used. My mother finally stepped aside from the kitchen entrance. You should take your shoes off, she murmured. Like that mattered. Like that was the problem standing in the doorway. I bent down slowly. My knees cracked. Nobody spoke while I unlaced my boot. That silence was deliberate. I could feel it. They watched me too quietly, the way people watch an animal limp toward them after disappearing into the woods for months. I became aware of every small sound. Wet laces dragging. My breathing. Ryan scratching his jaw. The clock ticking. Tego, tego, tego. I suddenly remembered being 14 years old at this same doorway, while my father stood over me asking where the missing money from his wallet went. I remembered trying to explain that I didn't take. I remembered Ryan sitting on the couch saying nothing. I remembered my father's face growing calmer the more upset I became. That was the thing about him. The angrier you got, the quieter he became. And the quieter he became, the more insane you sounded. The money was found 2 days later in Ryan's gym bag. Nobody apologized. Not one. Instead, my father had looked at me over dinner and said, "Well, maybe next time don't act guilty," as if panic itself proved something. As if being hurt made me suspicious. I stood upright again. My back hurt. My father finally moved aside. "Go put your stuff in the guest room," he said. Guest room. Not your room. Not home. The guest room. Like I was temporary. Like they already expected me to leave again. Ryan smirked as he passed me. "You picked a hell of a time to come crawling back," he said. I smelled cologne and toothpaste when he brushed by. Expensive cologne. No, clean, stable. Everything about him felt polished now. He worked at my father's company. Regional operations manager. My father mentioned it constantly on the phone during the few conversations we'd had over the years. Ryan closed the deal. Ryan bought a condo. Ryan got promoted. Ryan this. Ryan that. Every achievement delivered casually enough to sound accidental. Never accidental. I carried my bag upstairs. The hallway looked smaller than I remembered. The ceiling lower. Family photos still lined the wall in identical black frame. Ryan's graduation picture sat near the top. Mine was lower, slightly crooked. I stared at it while walking past. 19 years old. Forced smile. Eyes already tired. I stopped outside the guest room door. My chest tightened unexpectedly. The room used to be mine. They had repainted it. Gray walls now, no posters, no desk. No evidence I had ever existed there, except the faint dent near the closet door where I used to slam it during arguments. I stood motionless in the doorway while the rain hissed outside the windows. Something inside me shifted quietly. Not dramatic, not visible, just a small internal movement, like ice cracking far underwater. I walked in slowly and set the bag near the bed. The mattress springs groaned when I sat down. My entire body felt heavy. Not physically, psychologically heavy. Like every object in the room was pressing inward. The silence here wasn't silent. It was listening. I rubbed my face hard with both hands. I could hear muffled voices downstairs already. Ryan talked. My father laughing again. Then lower voice. Then quiet. Talking about me. Of course they were. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees and stared at the carpet. A dark stain near the corner. Probably old water damage or wine or blood. My brain always did that. Took neutral things and turned them threatening. That habit started in this house. I remember lying awake as a kid, listening to my parents argue downstairs after midnight. Not screaming. Worse than screaming. Controlled voices. Long silences between sentences. My mother crying quietly enough that you could mistake it for breathing. Then footstep. Then doors shutting. Then silence again. And in that silence, my imagination would start building shapes out of nothing. A belt hitting skin. Hands around throat. Bodies collapsing. I used to picture my father standing over her in the dark kitchen, while she whispered apologies for things she didn't do. In the morning, everyone acted normal. That was the rule here. Nothing happened if nobody named it. I lay back slowly on the bed now and stared at the ceiling. The house creaked around me, expanding, settling, breathing. I closed my eyes for 1 second, just one, and immediately saw the office, the conference room, Mr. Delaney's expression, that carefully neutral corporate pity. Maybe it would be best if you took some time, not fired. Never technically fired, just removed. Soft language, Plain language. Language designed to make destruction sound collaborative. I opened my eyes instantly. My pulse was climbing again. I sat up too fast. The room tilted slightly. No. Don't think about that yet. Not yet. But it kept coming anyway. The emails, the accusation. The look on Melissa's face when she avoided eye contact near the elevators. The HR representative folding her hands carefully before speaking. Every memory felt unfinished. Corrupted. Like there was a missing piece everyone else could see except me. A knock came at the door. 3 light taps. My mother. I knew immediately. Nobody else in this house knocked like they were apologizing for existing. Yeah, I said. She opened the door halfway. You hungry? I almost said no automatically. Then my stomach cramped hard enough to answer for me. A little, she nodded, still not looking directly at me. There's soup, of course. The universal meal for people who have failed. I followed her downstairs a minute later. Kitchen light seemed brighter now. Sharper. Ryan sat at the table scrolling through his phone, while my father watched muted television in the living room recliner. Nobody acknowledged me immediately. That hurt more than hostility would have, because hostility at least requires emotional investment. Indifference is colder. My mother placed a bowl in front of me. Steam rose upward, carrying the smell of chicken broth and black pepper. I realized suddenly how hungry I actually was. My hands shook slightly when I picked up the spoon. Ryan noted. Of course he noticed. His eyes flicked downward, then upward, then away. Tiny movement. Tiny satisfaction. You still taking those pills? He asked casually. The spoon stopped halfway to my mouth. My mother froze at the counter. My father kept watching television. I don't know what you mean, I said. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Anxiety meds, he said. You were on them before you left, right? His tone sounded harmless. Untrusted. But underneath it I felt the pressure, the trap, because there was no correct answer. If I said yes, I was unstable. If I said no, I was defensive. My chest tightened. I'm fine, I said again. There it was. That phrase. Again. My father finally spoke from the living room without turning around. People who are fine usually don't have to keep saying it. Silent. A deep, horrible silence. My mother resumed wiping the counter, even though it was already clean. Ryan smiled faintly at the table. I stared into the soup. Tiny islands of oil floated on the surface. The broth trembled because my hand wasn't steady. I hated that they could still do this to me. That was the worst part. 3 years away and they still knew exactly where to press. Exactly which version of me appeared inside this house. Not the man I tried to become outside. Not the confident voice I used during meetings. Not the version of myself that survived alone in a different city. No. Inside this house I became observational. Careful. Person constantly monitoring emotional weather patterns for danger. I ate another spoonful. Too hot. Burned my tongue. Ryan watched me chew. You hear from Claire lately? He asked. That name landed inside my stomach like metal. I kept my face still with effort. No, he nodded slowly like he already knew that answer too. Claire. Jaiza. Even hearing her name inside this house felt wrong. She had hated coming here. Said the air felt poisoned. The first time she met my father, she squeezed my hand so hard under the dinner table, I lost feeling in 2 fingers. Later that night she asked, why does everyone talk like they're waiting for someone to explode? I didn't have an answer then. Still don't. Ryan tapped his phone screen idly. I saw she got engaged. I looked up before I could stop myself. There it was. Immediate. Reflexive. And Ryan saw it. Saw everything. Tiny widening of my eyes. The involuntary breath. His smile deepened almost invisibly. My father muted the television. Not to join the conversation. Just to listen better. Something cold slid through my spine. I didn't know that, I said carefully. Really? Ryan tilted his head. She posts about it everywhere. I couldn't swallow suddenly. Soup sat thick in my throat. The room felt warmer. Smaller. My mother finally turned around. That's enough, Ryan, but she said it softly. Without force. Without expectation. Ryan shrugged. What? I'm just talking. No, he wasn't. He was testing structural weakness. That's what he always did. As kids, he used to trap insects inside jars just to watch how long they moved before exhaustion took over. Not out of cruelty exactly, out of fascination. He liked pressure, liked observation, liked discovering where breaking points live. I pushed the bowl away slightly. I'm tired, I murmured. My father stood from the recliner. You should be, he said. Sounds like life finally caught up with you. Then he walked upstairs. Just like that. No raised voice, no argument. Just another precise incision before bed. I sat motionless at the table after he disappeared. The house groaned softly around us. Ryan returned to scrolling on his phone. My mother stared into the sink. Nobody spoke. And somehow that silence felt planned too. Like I had already been repositioned inside the family system within a single hour of arriving. Failure. Unstable. Returned. Dependent. I could feel the roll settling over my skin again. Like old clothing pulled from storage. I stood slowly. Good night, I said. Neither of them answered immediately. Then my mother whispered. Good night. Ryan didn't look up. Back upstairs, I closed the guest room door carefully and leaned against it. My breathing sounded too loud. My pulse wouldn't slow down. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed again. Then sat there. Just sat there. Staring at the wall. Thoughts moving in circles. Claire engaged. Why did that hurt? Of course she moved on. You disappeared. You unraveled. You stopped answering calls. You became impossible to hold together. The thoughts came faster now. Messier. I rubbed my hands over my face again and suddenly realized something horrifying. Part of me had expected coming back here would feel temporary. Strategic. Like regrouping. Sitting alone in that gray room, listening to my family breathe through the walls, I felt something much worse settling in. Regression. Like the person I became outside this house was already dissolving. Like this place had been waiting patiently for me to weaken enough to absorb me again. I stood abruptly and paced once across the room. Twice. The floor creaked under my weight. I stopped at the window. Rain blurred the backyard into smears of black and silver. The old swing set was still there. Rusting. Crooked. Ryan broke my arm there once when we were kids. Not intentionally. At least that's what everyone said afterward. But I still remember the look on his face before he pushed me. Not anger. Curiosity. I remember lying in the grass screaming while he stood over me breathing hard. Then my father came outside. And the first thing he asked was, what did you do to make him that angry? Not are you hurt? Not what happened. What did you do? I pressed my forehead lightly against the cold glass now. My reflection stared back faintly. Older. More hollow than I remembered. There was a moment not dramatic, not cinematic, where I genuinely couldn't tell if returning here had been a mistake or an inevitability. Like maybe every decision I'd made for the past 3 years had only been a wider circle leading back to this house. Back to this room. Back to this version of myself. Downstairs I heard laughter again. Ryan's. Then my father's. Low. Muffled. Comfortable. I stood completely still while the sound traveled upward through the wall. And for the first time since arriving, something inside me began to change. Not strength. Not clarity. Something dark. A slow spreading awareness that they were not surprised I came back. Which meant somewhere deep inside them. What? They had always believed I would fail exactly like this. I didn't sleep. I lay on my back in the dark guest room with my eyes open, while the house settled around me in slow mechanical sighs. Pipes ticking. Floorboards adjusting. Wind brushing against the siding hard enough to make faint scratching sounds near the gutter. Every sound felt intentional. Every silence felt worse. The digital clock beside the bed glowed too. 13 in dull red numbers. Then 2. 14. Then 2. 15. Time wasn't moving normally anymore. It dragged. Thickened. My body felt exhausted enough to collapse, but my mind refused to loosen. Thoughts kept circling the same places like fingers probing bruises. Claire engaged. Delaney's expression. Ryan smiling downstairs. My father saying life finally caught up with you. The worst part was how familiar this feeling was. Not sadness. Not even humiliation. It was the sensation of shrinking psychologically inside this house. Like every wall carried an older version of me inside it, and the longer I stayed here, the more those older selves crawled back into my skin. At 2:21, footsteps moved down the hallway. Slow, measured. I froze immediately. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Silent. My pulse climbed so fast it hurt. I stared at the handle. Nothing moved. Then another soft creak. Someone shifting weight outside. Listening. I sat upright without realizing I was doing it. The darkness inside the room suddenly felt dense, heavy. The handle didn't turn. No knock came. But whoever stood there remained for several seconds too long. Then the footsteps continued down the hallway toward the stairs. I exhaled shakily. Ryan. It had to be Ryan. But why stand there? Why not knock? Why not just walk past? I swung my legs off the bed slowly and crossed the room. The carpet felt rough beneath my feet. I opened the door carefully. The hallway was empty, dark except for weak moonlight leaking through the stairwell window. I stepped out anyway. The air upstairs carried the stale smell of dust and old paint. Another creak came from downstairs. Then silence again. I should have gone back to bed. Instead, I moved toward the staircase. Each step groaned quietly under my weight as I descended. The living room was dark except for television light flickering blue across the wall. My father sat alone in the recliner, watching static. Not a channel, just static. The volume low enough to sound like distant rainfall. He didn't look at me when I reached the bottom of the stairs. "You always did wander at night," he murmured. I swallowed. "What are you doing?" He took a sip from a glass resting beside him. "Whiskey." "I could ask you the same thing," the television hissed softly. White noise filled the room. I became aware of how cold the floor felt beneath my feet. "How long were you standing outside my room?" I asked. That finally made him glance at me. Not surprised, not defensive, interested. "Was someone outside your room?" The way he said it, gentle, almost concerned. A trap immediately opened beneath the question. Because if I insisted yes, I sounded paranoid. If I hesitated, he controlled the narrative. My chest tightened. I heard footsteps. He looked back at the static, then smiled faintly. "You always hear things when you're stressed." There it was again. That quiet erosion. Never direct enough to confront. Never obvious enough to accuse. Just enough pressure to make you distrust your own perception. I stared at him. "You were there?" "No," the answer came instantly. Smoothly. Without effort. The television crackled. "You sure you're sleeping okay?" he asked. Something ugly moved inside me then. Pulse of anger so sudden it almost scared me. "Why do you keep doing that?" He looked over slowly. "Doing what?" "Making me feel insane." His expression didn't change. But I saw it. The tiny satisfaction behind his eyes. Not because I was yelling. Because I finally named it. That was the thing he enjoyed most. Not controlling people. Watching them realize they were being controlled. "I think," he said quietly, "you do that well enough on your own." I laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. "Jesus Christ, you lost your job. I know. You lost your apartment. I know. You came back here after swearing you never would." Each sentence landed carefully. Measured. He stood slowly from the recliner. "And now you're wandering through the house at 2 in the morning, accusing people of standing outside your door." He tilted his head slightly. "What exactly would you call that?" My throat tightened. Because part of me suddenly couldn't tell if he was manipulating me or simply describing reality. That was how he worked. He mixed truth with distortion until separating them became impossible. "I'm going back upstairs," I muttered. He nodded once. "Good idea." I turned away, then stopped halfway toward the stairs. "You always wanted this," I said without facing him. Silence. The static hissed behind me. Finally. "Wanted what?" "This." I turned slowly. To see me fail, for the first time all night, something shifted in his face. Not guilt. Recognition. Then he smiled. Small. Cold. "No," he said softly. "I just knew you would." The words hit harder because they were calm. Not angry. Not emotional. Certain. I went upstairs before I could say something reckless. My legs felt strange climbing the step. Wake up. Unsteady. Like my body no longer trusted the floor beneath it. Back inside the guest room, I locked the door. Then immediately hated myself for doing it. Because now if someone tried the handle and found it locked, they'd know I was afraid. I sat on the edge of the bed breathing hard. The room felt smaller than before. The gray walls seemed closer somehow. I rubbed both hands over my face and tried grounding myself. Count object, window, chair, lamp, closet, bag. But my thoughts kept splintering sideways. What if he's right? What if you are unraveling again? No, no. I pressed my palms hard against my eyes until colors burst behind them. You know what this house does to you. That's all this is. But another thought slid underneath that one immediately. Then why does it work so easily? I don't remember falling asleep. Only fragments afterward. Dreams without structure. Claire standing in the kitchen staring at me while water leaked from the ceiling. Ryan laughing somewhere upstairs. My father whispering through walls I couldn't see through. At some point I woke to sunlight pressing weakly through the curtains. For several seconds I didn't remember where I was. Then the smell of the house returned. Coffee, dust, old wood, and everything rushed back instantly. My stomach clenched. Voices drifted upward from downstairs. Ryan and my father, talking quietly. I couldn't make out words, only tone. Comfortable. I sat up slowly. My clothes from yesterday still hung damp over the chair. The room looked even less familiar in daylight. Temporary. Impersonal. Like a hotel room designed around absence. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. That emptiness hurt more than rejection would have. I showered quickly. The bathroom mirror fogged around the edges, while hot water pounded against my shoulders hard enough to sting. I stayed there too long because the sound drowned out thinking. But eventually the thoughts returned anyway. Delaney, the investigation. Melissa refusing eye contact, the email. My chest tightened again. I still hadn't fully processed what happened at work, because I genuinely didn't understand all of it. That was the terrifying part. The accusation itself felt slippery in memory. They claimed files had been altered, reports modified, numbers changed before submission. My credentials accessed the system late at night multiple times over several weeks. But I didn't remember doing it. At first I assumed someone hacked the account. Then HR asked why security footage showed me entering the building after hours. And they were right. It was me. I saw myself on the footage, walking into the office at 11:47 p.m. Expression blank, shoulders tense, then leaving 3 hours later. I had no memory of any of it. None. I told them that. Nobody believed me. Why would they? I barely believed myself. By the time I came downstairs, Ryan sat at the table eating eggs while scrolling through his phone. My father read the newspaper. My mother stood near the stove. Nobody greeted me. I poured coffee silently. The smell made me nauseous. You remember Evan Mercer? Ryan asked suddenly. I looked up cautiously. From high school, I remember him. He killed himself last year. The room went still. My father kept reading. My mother froze near the stove. Ryan stabbed another piece of egg with his fork. Apparently he'd been having paranoid episodes for months before it happened. My heartbeat quickened. What does that have to do with anything? Ryan shrugged. Nothing, but he smiled slightly afterward. Tiny. Barely there. I set the coffee mug down harder than intended. You know what? I said quietly. Just say what you're trying to say. Ryan looked genuinely surprised. I'm not trying to say anything. Yes, you are. My father lowered the newspaper carefully. Enough, the words snapped through the room. Ryan leaned back in his chair. I could feel anger building now. Real anger. Hot. Shaking. I'm serious, I said. You keep implying, calm down. My father's voice remained perfectly level. And somehow that made everything worse. Because the calmer he sounded, the more irrational I became by comparison. I heard my breathing speeding up. Ryan watched me closely now. Observing. Interested again. Like he was waiting for something specific. You think I'm crazy, I said. Nobody answered immediately. That silence said more than words could have. My mother finally whispered. No one said that, but she wouldn't look at me. That destroyed something inside me a little. Because if she truly believed I was fine, eye contact would have been easy. Instead, she looked frightened, careful, like I might become unpredictable. I stepped backward from the table. Suddenly, I couldn't stay in the room another second. I need air, then I left before anyone answered. Outside, the morning air felt cold and wet against my face. Clouds hung low over the neighborhood. Everything smelled like rain and soil and distant chimney smoke. I walked without direction. Just movement. Night movement. The neighborhood looked almost identical to how it did years ago. Same cracked sidewalk. Same leaning mailboxes. Same dead patches in lawns where nothing ever grew properly. Memory layered itself over everything. There's where Ryan punched me in the mouth when I was 12. There's where Claire waited in her car the first time she picked me up after an argument with my father. There's where I sat alone one winter night convinced I would disappear someday and nobody in the house would notice for hours. My breathing slowly steadied as I walked. Then I heard tires behind me. Car moving slowly. I turned instinctively. Ryan's black sedan rolled beside the curb. Passenger window lowering. "You okay?" he asked. Concern in his voice sounded almost real. That was the terrifying thing. Ryan could imitate empathy perfectly when he wanted to. "I'm fine, there's that phrase again." I kept walking. Car crawled alongside me. "You're acting weird," he said softly. I stopped. "What do you want from me?" Ryan parked near the curb and stepped out. Hands in pocket. Relaxed. Controlled. "I'm trying to help you." "No, you're not." He studied me for a moment. Then sighed. "You know what your problem is?" I laughed bitterly. "Which one? You think everyone's against you. That's because they are." "No," he said. "People just get tired." My throat tightened. "Tired of what?" "Tired of managing you." The words landed like blunt force. He stepped closer slowly. "You don't even realize what it's like sometimes," he continued quietly. "Being around you," my chest felt hollow suddenly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ryan's expression softened slightly. Again, almost believable. "You disappear emotionally for weeks," he said. "Then suddenly you're angry at everybody because they stopped chasing after you. That's not true, isn't it?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because part of me remembered Claire saying something similar once. "You shut down and then resent people for leaving you alone." Ryan watched uncertainty spread across my face, and I knew immediately he saw it happening. That tiny internal fracture. That hesitation. He moved closer. "You scared Claire," he said quietly. My pulse slammed upward. "What?" "She talked to Mom sometimes after you moved." My mouth went dry. "You're lying." "She said you changed near the end." "No, she said you stopped sleeping." My breathing quickened. "She said sometimes you'd stare at her like you didn't recognize her." "No," but memory betrayed me immediately. Fragment. Claire asking if I was listening. Claire crying in the kitchen. Claire sighing. "You disappear while looking directly at me." Ryan lowered his voice further. "She said she started feeling unsafe." I shoved him hard before I consciously decided to move. Not enough to hurt him, but enough. Ryan stumbled one step backward, then went very still. The neighborhood suddenly felt silent. Too silent. I realized immediately what I'd done. Ryan looked at me differently now. Not mocking. "What's that thing?" "You see," he murmured. Panic exploded through my chest. "No, you don't even know when you're escalating. That's not what happened. You shoved me. You pushed me first psychologically." Even saying it sounded insane. Ryan's expression changed subtly at that sentence. Tiny satisfaction. God, no. I heard it too late. How unstable it sounded. He nodded slowly, then stepped back toward the car. "You need help," he said softly. Not cruelly. That was the worst part. Like he genuinely believed it. Or wanted me to believe he believed it. I stood frozen on the sidewalk while he got back inside the sedan. The window lowered one final time. "You know Dad's been talking to someone." Ice flooded my stomach. "What?" "A doctor." My vision narrowed slightly. "What are you talking about?" Ryan hesitated, like he was deciding whether to say more. Then, "He's worried about you." The car drove away before I could answer. I stood there breathing hard. "A doctor? No. No. That couldn't be real." Suddenly dozens of tiny moments rearranged themselves inside my head. The questions about medication. The comments about sleep. Careful tone everyone used. My father watching me too closely. A horrifying thought emerged slowly. What if they had already decided something was wrong with me before I came home? What if every interaction since arriving had been filtered through that assumption? I started walking back toward the house too quickly. My thoughts spiraled violently now. They think you're unstable. They're documenting behavior. They're watching reactions, no. Dub. That's paranoia. But another voice answered immediately. Then why does everything feel orchestrated? By the time I reached the house, my hands were trembling. I walked inside hard enough to rattle the door. My father sat alone in the living room. He looked up calmly. "Where's Mom?" "At the store." I stepped closer. "Why are you talking to doctors about me?" No confusion appeared on his face. "Only patient. Dangerous patient." "You're upset. Answer the question." He folded the newspaper slowly. "We're concerned, we." That word hit hard. Not just him. Everyone. Concerned about what? My father studied me silently for several seconds. Then, "You've been deteriorating for years." The room tilted slightly. "No, yes, I lost my job. You lost control long before that." My pulse roared in my ears now. "You don't get to define me. I'm trying to understand what happened to you." "You mean what happened to me here?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "There it is." "What?" "The blame." I laughed harshly. "You spent my entire childhood convincing me my emotions were defects. That's dramatic. You manipulated everything. You always were sensitive, sensitive." That word. That fucking word. Every memory attached to it instantly. Crying after Ryan hit me. Sensitive. Asking why he treated me differently. Sensitive. Having panic attacks before school. Sensitive. Not traumatized. Not hurting. Sensitive. I stepped closer without realizing it. "You broke me in this house." My father stood slowly. "You were never stable enough to break." Silent. Total silent. The sentence entered me like poison. Something inside my head seemed to split open around it. I suddenly couldn't tell whether I wanted to scream or collapse. My father kept watching me carefully. Then his expression changed. Subtly. Not fear. Readiness. Like he expected volatility now. That realization horrified me more than the sentence itself. Because I understood instantly. He was waiting for me to prove him right. My breathing became shallow. Vaz. I backed away. "No," I whispered. "What, you want me to lose control? That's absurd." But he smiled slightly while saying it. "Tiny. Barely there. Enough. Enough to make me doubt everything again." I turned and walked upstairs before I exploded. Behind me, he didn't follow. Didn't stop me. That felt intentional too. Inside the guest room, I locked the door again. Then stood motionless in the center of the room. My thoughts no longer moved cleanly. They collided. Repeated. Looped. "You were never stable enough to break." Not stable enough. Not stable enough. I pressed both hands against my temples hard enough to hurt. "Breathe. Just breathe." But the room felt wrong now. Distorted. The gray walls seemed unfamiliar again, like a set replica of a room rather than a real place. I looked toward the mirror near the closet. For one terrible second, my reflection didn't feel connected to me. Not visually. Psychologically. Like I was observing someone else attempt to remain calm. My phone buzzed suddenly. I flinched violently. Unknown number. I stared at it, then answered. "What? What?" "Hello." Silence. Soft breathing. Then a woman's voice. "Daniel." My chest tightened instantly. "Claire." Every muscle in my body locked. "How did you get this number? You called me 3 times last night." I went cold. "What, at 2 in the morning?" "No, I didn't." "You don't remember?" The room seemed to sway slightly. "No." Claire hesitated. Her breathing crackled softly through the speaker. "You sounded confused." "That wasn't me." "Daniel." No. No, I didn't call you." Silent. Then very quietly. "This is what I meant." My throat closed. "What?" "When I said you changed." I sat slowly onto the edge of the bed because my legs suddenly felt weak. "You used to lose time," she whispered. "No, you don't remember conversations." "No, you'd say things and then deny them later." The pressure inside my skull became unbearable. "No, I was scared of you sometimes." The sentence destroyed the remaining structure holding me together. Not because she yelled it. Because she sounded sad. I stared at the carpet while her breathing filled the silence. Finally she spoke again. "You need help." Then the line disconnected. I sat there unmoving. Phone still against my ear. The room utterly silent now. My pulse slow. Strangely slow. Like something inside me had gone beyond panic into numbness. Lose time? No, no. That couldn't be true. Could it? Memory began rearranging itself violently. Nights at the office I couldn't fully recall. Driving home without remembering the route. Finding open tabs on my laptop I didn't remember using. Conversations that felt incomplete afterward. I stood abruptly. No. They did this to you. This house. Them. But another thought emerged immediately after. Then why did it start before you came back? I looked at the mirror again. My reflection looked exhausted, frightened, unfamiliar. And suddenly I understood the true horror of the situation. Not that my family might be manipulating me. Not that I might be mentally deteriorating. The horror was that I could no longer distinguish between those possibilities. Both explanations fit. Both felt true. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. Voices. Ryan returning home. My father speaking quietly. Then silent. Then all three of them talking softly together beneath me. I couldn't hear words. Only tone. Careful. Measured. Like people discussing something fragile or dangerous. I stood alone in the guest room while the house breathed around me. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't know whether I was trapped inside a manipulative family system or inside my own collapsing mind. The uncertainty itself became unbearable. Outside, rain began falling again. Soft at first, then harder. The sound swallowed the house slowly. And somewhere beneath that sound, beneath the voices downstairs, beneath the shaking pressure inside my skull, I realized something irreversible had already happened. I had come home believing I still knew who I was. Now I wasn't certain of anything anymore.